coming back here, you reflect a lot on your university undergraduate here. And I can tell you that I won't tell you when, it's not important anymore, but when I left Saskatoon, I came by train and I took a trunk, not that one, but another one, and I cried all the way to Winnipeg. First time away, big move, didn't know anybody going to Carleton. All my friends were going west to the riches of Alberta. And I met a grad student. I can't remember many things, sometimes in a busy day, but I remember Ulrich Hubener, who was sitting across from me in the train, a grad student, very nice man, who sort of befriended me from Winnipeg to Ottawa. And I felt much better when I got to Carleton. At least I knew someone. I was in third Lanark, so we actually had a view of some of the green, lovely space that we now see being utilized here at Carleton. And it had pluses and minuses. The minuses is it's always a long fall, this year more than others, and you never feel like studying when it's this beautiful. And exams always came in the spring when it was so beautiful in Ottawa. Similarly, it was hard to get down to it. But I had a wonderful time at Carleton. I played varsity volleyball. I fell in love, fell out of love, went to the pub, had Friday mornings in first year French, which I thought I did very well in my academics at Carleton, but then discovered looking over my first year transcript that it was not too good because French was 8:30 on Friday mornings and pub night was Thursdays. So typical first year experience. Anyway, had a wonderful start, got involved with Ottawa, so critical for a journalist, and I am thrilled to be back here. Just to, you're probably wondering, there's not a great story about my foot. I had surgery two weeks ago, and they dug a bone out of my heel that wasn't supposed to be there. It was scheduled surgery, and I thought I better come up with a better story than that, being a journalist, so I said that somebody stomped on my instep in the rush to get Peter Mansbridge's job. So that is not the real reason either. So I thought I'd do a little bit of a show and tell here, a little bit unorthodox, but it served a purpose. So sometimes, as you know, I travel a great deal, and sometimes it's long and tiring, and when I get back, I have a little secret. I head for a pedicure. And I sit in that comfy chair with that awful, massaging thing with the remote control, and my feet are in warm water, and people are poking at my toes, and I fall asleep regularly. And it's very soothing, but kind of embarrassing when the woman taps me on the shoulder and says, "Ma'am, you can go, your polish is dry." If I don't fall asleep, which is about half the time, I pick up the women's magazines in the salon, which I don't normally buy anymore, just don't have time. And I flip to the back because I have a particular fascination with the question and answer of what 8 essential things in your life could you not live without. Now they're asking Kim Kardashian, and all the things she comes up with in her carry-on are completely lovely, and none of them look like mine. So I thought, well, what is in my carry-on as a female journalist and as a woman foreign correspondent? And I thought it would serve a purpose. So, well, we have stilettos for our interviews, or maybe reporting on TIFF or something. We have the navy blue blazer, which all of us know goes up and down, and it can make you look serious, or you can do it with jeans. In former days, I had a sleeper in my bag because I do the daycare dash, like many of us, and there might be an accident, so I pop in a few diapers as well. And this guy just went to university this fall. I would have hiking boots for marching around disasters like the Philippines, the monsoon, or trudging through the raw sewage in the Brazilian favelas. I have a burqa or 2. Controversial. I have one in blue and this one. I wear them. People criticize me for wearing them, but in southern Afghanistan, they serve 2 purposes. One, as a journalist, I want to meet people where they are. And women in southern Afghanistan are in burqas. So when I arrive at their homes in a burqa, I am saying to them, I don't appreciate what you're doing, but at least I get it. I'm going to, be where you are. It's also a perfect disguise for someone who looks like me working in Kandahar city. until they ask me a question, which I always lived in fear of. I have a couple cans of tuna, because when we hitchhiked into Libya, there was no food. Gaddafi was on the run, and Tripoli, there was no food. There was no food at the Radisson Blu, no water either for 10 days, I might add. 200 journalists in the swimming pool for washing. Cords, we all live in fear of leaving any of those behind, and they multiply as the years go on. Half a flak jacket for weight purposes today. Flak jacket for southern Afghanistan and other conflict areas that I go to. I have a little red book, not a black book, and on one side I say Aiden's orthodontics appointment, 7th birthday party, what am I going to come up with, the loot bags, and on the other is, one-on-one with the foreign minister, Russian elections coming up. I've got to get that online piece done. It's kind of the duality of a woman in journalism's life. And then this is my trusty passport case, and this has treasures. It has boarding passes to unusual places I've been to in the past, my passport, of course, and it has pictures of my sons and my father to remind me that this carry-on for life is only one of my jobs. In fact, this is my second job, and my first job is all the people who love and care and support for me, and it's part of all our lives too. So that's kind of what my carry-on looked like. It had nothing to do with Kim Kardashian's or any of those lovely celebrities, but you know what, I wouldn't trade it at all. I grew up watching the first woman get a major role in television, Jan Tennant. She started before Barbara Walters became a network host. She got her break around Easter in 1974 when the regular anchor George and his backup George as well, both were at a golf tournament. So they said, Jan, can you come and sit in and do the news? She was asked to fill in. She did a marvelous job and went on to become a substitute anchor, a weekend anchor, and then on to Global News. She was ahead of her time in many ways. Jan was really an extraordinary person, not only beautiful and talented, but she'd sit in editorial meetings knitting. Why? Because she couldn't stand smokers. And she'd say at the time, put your cigarettes out. And they'd say, stop knitting. She said, I'll stop knitting when you put your smokes out. So she was a trailblazer in many ways, and she paved the way for women like myself and for Susan Harada, who was my colleague some years ago and who was way ahead of us and anchoring the Journal, and we all envied her terribly, let me tell you. So I got to thinking, that was so long ago, and so much has changed. Why are we talking about women in journalism still? You know, we heard that 3 women graduated 70 years ago from Carleton. Now hundreds graduate every year, and 2/3 of them are women. 2 of the 3 broadcasters are women now. There are women in senior roles, many of them in this room, and many others at my network, for example, 3 senior women in editorial and senior management roles. At CTV, Wendy Freeman is the news president. So why are we talking about women in media? Aren't we beyond that? Well, a woman is running for US president. There's a woman chancellor. The British Prime Minister is a woman. The second time we've had a woman Prime Minister in Canada, albeit briefly. The head of the International Monetary Fund was here this week. She is a woman. We've been busting through for a long time. If we are still fixated on the gender question, why? Why are we? Well, because there is a difference, being a woman in journalism. Because there are still the likes of Roger Ailes and his preying, manipulative power plays with women. Because the woman running for the White House right now has been insulted with bumper stickers saying, bring down the bitch. And we are reporting on things like that. Because some women today, writing, posting, and tweeting are exposed to a sickly diatribe full of barely disguised misogyny. Because we're still reporting on a judge in this country who asks a young woman complaining of rape, why don't you close your legs? Or why didn't you put your bottom down in the basin to avoid penetration? And he still is arguing to keep his position on the bench. So we've busted through, but there's backlash, there's pushback. We face different but pressures as our most brilliant male colleagues, and there are many. We just follow a different path. Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean In says, you know, To get to the top, it's a jungle gym. There's no clear path to the top. We know that many more women graduate from journalism schools than men, but a few years down the line, say 10, that number doesn't hold up. In the US in 2014, a US study in Neiman Report showed that while women are more than half the journalism graduates, they represent only a third of newspaper supervisors, just under a third of TV directors, and less than a quarter of radio news directors. So there's attrition. And the question is why? Well, many reasons, I'm sure. Some suggest it's historical and that real change takes more time, and some argue that equity shouldn't be the ultimate goal, and I think there's a good question there. But I think the reasons are more nuanced. It likely has something to do with that carry-on. It's tough, wholly unpredictable, non-9-to-5 work, and it's hard to do all of your life in our profession. It's not just ours, the armed forces, medicine, law. Similarly, women have challenges doing it all. But there are differences as well as in how we ourselves view ourselves in the media and how other people view us. I remember being pregnant with my first child and being at a Christmas party. I was a working professional journalist at the time. And I was about 2 weeks to my due date. And I'd gone to the maternity shop and bought a really lovely sort of black velvety kind of outfit. And I thought, you know, given that I was pretty pregnant, I looked okay until my colleague came up, a man I still love and was a colleague and a friend. And he said to me, "Susan," he said, "my wife and I were watching you on the news the other day, and I said to her, how much bigger can she get?" He didn't say it with malice at all. It was just unthinking. But it does happen. And, you know, I couldn't have a cocktail at that party, but geez, if I had one, I would have either downed it immediately or dumped it on his tux. You know, our assignments called away often or late at night working to meet the deadlines, and they are multiplying those deadlines. Some people think it's still fair game in that environment to question one's commitment, in this case, to mothering. At the school playground once, I just returned from Afghanistan after a month away. I went to pick up my son, and the father of one of my kids' playmates came up to me and said, "Susan, I saw you on the news in Afghanistan. How does your husband do it?" And I went, "Well, glad you're concerned." And again, he didn't say it with any malice. It was just his view of the arrangement, which was foreign to him. And I note these differences along the way, not with bitterness and not reproach, just observation. I really save my anger for the many severe injustices that women face in countries where I report on them. It brings an advantage being a female journalist, I'm sure you can imagine. A huge plus is access. In deeply conservative countries like southern Afghanistan, women cannot be in the company of another man unless it's her husband or her family member. So in Afghanistan in 2011, I reported the war that Canada was involved in this way. Women here tell a different kind of war story, a war against abuse and abandonment. And I spoke with a woman, Freba, who was married at 15, and her in-laws mistreated her. They abused her. Her brother-in-law gave her a can of petrol instead of kerosene one day. She says deliberately, it blew up, burning her arm and killing her son. I told the story of a 19-year-old Mabuba who wanted to run in the then Beijing Olympics, and she cried telling me about the taunts and the threats, particularly against her father, who was hauled into jail when she was caught in the company of a male journalist telling her story. I brought home the story of Parween. Parween has stayed in my memory for many, many years because she was the most fiery 5'1" Kandahari woman I had ever met. She was in a sewing co-op, which really was a therapy group in effect. And I was asking her about the upcoming elections in Afghanistan, and she started to really rail on me about the things that Canada and its allies were not doing in southern Afghanistan. You promised to make my life secure. You promised that I wouldn't have to worry every day I send my children out into the streets that get blown up by an IED. You said when you came to this country you would do that, and you haven't done that. I can't tell you how unusual it is to have a woman in that culture being that vocal. And she was just like this. She was the mother of 6. I don't know, she was early 20s, late mid-20s. And I was so impressed with her, I started sort of laughing. I said, Parween, through a translator, I said, Parween, you should be running for president. And she said, I would, but I'm illiterate. And for me, that story told an awful lot about Afghanistan and the whole idea of liberating these women from the Taliban, a whole generation of women who'd been denied an education. And then she looked at me and she said, but my daughter's going to school. It was an amazing story that I wouldn't have heard probably had I been a male, only because I couldn't have gotten access. We're not better journalists, we're different journalists. And access is key for us to choose and tell different stories. Of the thousands of things that journalists choose to talk about, many times women choose different stories, and that's why it's so important. In 2014, I went to cover the World Cup in Brazil. And we chose to drill down on a story about sex and soccer, not really a sports story. Brazil, as you know, is known for sex tourism, and the World Cup was seen as a boon for business. Prostitution is legal. Problem was that underage prostitution isn't. And underage prostitutes were also seeing and being told that this was a money-making event, the World Cup tourism coming to Brazil. So we went to Recife on the northwest coast of Brazil, and I met a beautiful girl, 15. She had a 6-month-old son. Her husband was in jail for drugs. She lived in a ragged tin shack in a favela. And as we were told, as soon as girls in this environment become shapely, they are sent out to make money for the family. That's their reality. We didn't want to prey on the misery only, so we also went to a social center in Recife where big-hearted Brazilian women were caring for girls, trying to get them off the streets, allowing them space to have their babies, and educate them that having a shapely body did not mean they had to go out and sell themselves on the street to tourists coming to watch soccer. These stories are not gender-fenced. My male colleagues do an excellent job reporting all kinds of things in our country. But when you're talking to a 15-year-old about selling her body to a man, I think I'm going to get different answers. So it's really important to get women in newsrooms. And globally, it's really important to increase their numbers, even more so, in places where women's voices as power are silenced. But the gender issue in journalism in developed countries may seem quite dated now, as other inequalities crowd our space and we have other challenges. Cultural diversity, for one. It's as important, maybe more, right now at this juncture in our country. Diverse populations of journalists in newsrooms both choose and get access to different kinds of stories for the same reasons. People whose experience is not like our personal experience, whoever we are. I often wonder who amongst the 25,000 Syrian refugees plus that Canada has invited to come here in the last 6 months, who among them will be journalists next? I'm really excited to see. This is not to say that I can't report on Syria. I have, and I will continue to. But there is an argument in my case for fresh eyes into a culture, but there is so much more scope for people to offer our audiences if we draw from diverse communities. In the disruptive media world we now inhabit, barriers to access have been torn down. The technological limits of broadcast now, for you, if you're a young journalist, compared to when I came into the journalism world, are far less than before. With my phone, my iPhone, and a mic and a cable, I can broadcast from anywhere in the world there is Wi-Fi. That's wholly different. Social media is disrupting the landscape far more than any of us could have imagined even 5 years ago. The legacy media companies, as we know, do not guard the gates anymore. There are many more portals where young journalists can enter. This is a promising time for innovative people in journalism, no matter their gender. Legacy companies are struggling to find digital audiences. The generation which grew up digitally has lots to offer, which means that often they can come in at higher leadership positions than they normally would because the digital landscape is flatter, the hierarchy is less. The executive producer for digital news at the Washington Post was quoted, "If you walk in with a specific skill set that we need for a specific project, you're going to be leading people immediately. Young journalists jumping into higher positions. Yes, budgets are being thrashed. Yes, newspapers are being closed. Yes, there are layoffs, many in this country in the last 6 months. Photographers are being put out of work. But it's the CBC, for example, and many other places, digital newsrooms are growing. No one I know can confidently predict what the media landscape is going to look like 5 years from today. There are big red warning signs. Columbia University's Emily Bell at the Tao Center for Digital Journalism says, quote, "Facebook, for one, is swallowing journalism. It's the end of the news as we knew it." I share those cautions, but on the other side of the ledger, media today is pretty unmapped. There's new landscapes, new stories, new voices, new video, new passions. The range of storytellers is unprecedented, and it's happening far faster than the decades it took for women to break through into journalism. So, summing up, women in journalism, why are we still talking about it? Because it matters, still. So does greater representation of culture, of language, of color, and wealth in the media. It's simply a fact that no matter which chromosomes we carry, or whether we're white or of color, from rich developed countries or from poor developing nations, with each of us, our carry-on bag for life looks so different. And inside, there are so many stories.